And we sort of get a bit, I don't know, frustrated by modern sports stars of today. They're so media managed. They don't like to say anything controversial. It can sometimes be so difficult just to squeeze something out of them that feels authentic. What's your take on that these days? You know, in terms of just sports people being allowed to be who they are. I mean, are they just now too scared to be honest?
Well, it's a great question, a huge topic, really. I think it is still possible, and actually, I think smart people realize how to do it, and I think this is one of the great things about, you know, just about to go into the Euros. Maybe this part of the Gareth Southgate culture is sort of, because it's not as fresh now, is not appreciated as much as it should be. But I think one of the amazing things he did was sit down with these players who would join an England camp and see the press instantly as the enemy. It was always say as little as possible, you know, sort of batten down the hatches, and inevitably that builds, you know, fearfulness, it builds hostility, you know, the whole thing. It became almost like a blood sport between, you know, the England camp and the press, and Gareth sat his players down and said, you've all got stories to tell. I mean, no one gets to the top of their trade, you know, to play for England unless they've had a heck of a journey to get there. It's not, you know, we all do it, you know, as journalists, but as fans have sort of slipped into that lazy assumption of, well, you know, he's 20 years old, he's earning £300,000 a week. He's had it easy. He's got it too easy. He's too much too soon. Or Richard Sport. Well, none of them have got there without bumps along the way. I've been told they're not good enough at somewhere down the line, being rejected by a club, being doubting themselves. So, and he would say to them, look, you know, as with, you know, Raheem Sterling coming out talking about his, you know, incredibly underprivileged upbringing. Marcus Rashford, obviously, very famously, but yeah, more than that. Danny Rose, remember, coming out talking about mental health challenges. All of these guys, if they sit down and trust themselves and are trusted by the people around them to do it, would have a story to tell. And I just think, you know, sometimes I get why brand management can matter, and you know, for young men coming out and telling these stories, they might need some help, some advice with that. But actually, I think sometimes it's massively overcomplicated. You know, if you sit down with them and say, what's the story of your life? What's the story of your career? What were the hardships you had? Who were the people you'd like to thank? Who were the influencers? It shouldn't be that complicated. It should, you know, I just don't believe that, you know, none of them have got an interesting story to tell about how did I get here. And maybe the media, I'm not absolving the media in this, you know, we've got to ask the right questions or be grown up in the way we go about it. And obviously that's, you know, history's shown that that's not always the case either. But I think Gareth's encouragement of them, of you have all got a story to tell it, is been game changing in the whole relationship between not just England media and the team, but the fans and the team.
I completely agree. I mean, there's a whole group of people there who are right there able to tell their story that is more relatable than anyone else can tell to a group of people that are, you know, youths in whichever area of the country they are, from perhaps underprivileged backgrounds, you know, and very much in the thick of that sort of experience. Who better to relate to than somebody that's come from that past and been able to write their own story in a successful way? I don't know why you wouldn't absolutely shout that from the rooftops. I think it's always been a massive frustration of mine that you're not able to sort of establish those relationships, or they wouldn't allow you to, in the ways that you know you can really bring a story to the table that's worthwhile hearing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, bad results, and we all obviously understand where sort of, you know, niggles come into the relationship, and it can get, you know, difficult. You know, the England team lose a couple of games and suddenly everything tenses up. But I just think and there'll be those rocky periods, but I think just coming back to that core fundamental of actually, if we just go into the defensive sort of porcupine position, ultimately that's only going to make things worse for ourselves. We have to trust ourselves to keep going out and telling the story of what we're doing, telling the story of our ambitions, what we hope to achieve, how we got here and what we're trying to do. And I think I hope whoever follows on from Gareth, if that is this summer, tries to keep that, because I think it's that cultural shift. Say it doesn't feel as fresh now, so I do think it's almost it's win or bust going into this summer, which I think is I get that expectation, but I think it shouldn't be at the expense of forgetting all the other stuff that Gareth Southgate's done.
No, I 100% agree. I couldn't agree more. One of the other great articles that I found that you wrote was about greatness, while we're sort of on the subject of greatness. And you talked about the fact that we all know greatness when we see it, but it's really hard to describe it and write it down in the written word, which I completely
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Can empathize with. Because some words sometimes there's just no words for something that you're witnessing. But if you, of course, by your very nature, have to be able to write something. So what happens? How do you decide what adjectives to use when you're describing people like Federer or Djokovic or Cruyff or any of those great sporting icons? How do you figure out what to write about and that doesn't feel crass and feels good enough?
Yeah, I definitely try, and I'm sure I've failed many times to do justice to it. I mean, by the time you've seen the 25th Messi wonder goal of your life, then you're thinking, yeah, I think Messi's probably tested my bank of adjectives more than most. I think you come back to the feeling. I think that's was the feeling in that Messi goal? Was it surprise? Was it, was there a sense of ecstasy going around the stadium? Was it shock? Was it, was the goal deft, and what type of deftness? So I think back to that sort of writing from the heart, I guess. I think, and that's what it can often feel like in the moment, especially against deadline. It's a sort of, the head needs to act as a filter, but really you want to tap into what's the feeling, because you're the one lucky enough to be in the stadium. You're the one lucky enough to sense what's been the impact on the crowd. You're the one lucky enough to have a flavour of what, what's the smell of the air, So I think it's feeling. I think if I had any, advice to a young journalist coming through, it would be trust. Yeah. It's almost, don't strive for clever words. It would be take a pause and just think, how does this feel? Don't strain for the smart aleck sort of word. It would be just, in this moment, what's the overpowering feeling, and try, and once you get that sense, hopefully that almost tells you itself, puts into words what you feel and what you want to say.
This is the most horrible next question, which has been the sporting moment that's left you feeling more than any other?
Well, I think
a horrible follow-up.
No, but it's actually easy to write in one sense, because it absolutely, and I don't think I definitely didn't do it justice on the night, which is why I get a book plug in. I literally write this in the introduction. So I've written a book, 1999, Manchester United, the treble and all that, and I actually write in the sort of prologue to it that I want to go back and do justice to the most extraordinary drama I saw. I mean, I've been spoiled, could be spoiled for choice, but I think if you want to capture that feeling that almost only sport can give you, of just, I'll mind my language, but just, what have I just seen? And I can't, my brain is struggling to sort of catch up with what I've seen, because it was so, and obviously we had the treble, it was Matt Busby's birthday, we had the whole drama of the season, and the fact that it was, been built on comebacks. We had the fact that Ferguson's greatness depended on if he won a European Cup, and if he failed again, it was going to be almost, back to the bottom of the mountain, and would he ever do it? So I think, and from a journalist's point of view, just to put people in the moment. So the first, we're there, and nature of deadlines of a live match can be that you've basically, your words need to be ready to go on the final whistle. So 89 minutes have gone, and I have literally pressed send on 1,000 words of how Ferguson picked the wrong team, screwed up the treble, may go down in history as a chump, sort of, and I have pressed send. I mean, because, also we didn't have fancy Wi-Fi like now. So, and of course the first goal goes in, and, it's shock horror, wow. But then you think, I've got 30 minutes of extra time to sort of get my piece back and make sense of it and work out options.
Rewrite
and of course,
it.
just as you're thinking that, bang, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer scores. And I would say, the first 3 seconds of reaction to that are, I have just seen something in a sporting sense that is absolutely just nuts. And this is one of the greatest sort of Nou Camp of all places, and just the atmosphere is just, I get goosebumps now thinking about it. But of course, very quickly your professional head kicks in, which is, oh my God, I've now got 20 seconds. Literally, we had about 2 minutes to make sense of that history for the first edition. And many of my colleagues succeeded better than I did in doing justice to that. It took me to come back 20 years later and write a book about it.
Yeah, but weirdly, I guess it's that gut instinct piece as well that you talked about, not searching for the clever words, but searching for the feeling and what that did for you as much as anything else in that moment of time. Well,
Ferguson did it better than any of us. Football, bloody hell. That quote is 3 words. I would put it,
it's brilliant.
I write about it in the book. What is the best football quote of all time? Some people say, Diogo Benito from Pele, the beautiful game, and that captures, a wonderful flavour of what football can be, and it sort of feels like Pele, and it feels like Brazil, and it feels like, you can sort of imagine the Maracanã and, Copacabana, but football, bloody hell, that's a quote
Sums
for
it
the
up.
ages. It sort of sums up more than, sums up that game, that season, but it sums up football. How many times since do you just sit there and just go, football, bloody hell? We say it, every week. So Ferguson did, and again, that wasn't a sort of clever quote made up. That was just an instinctive, smiling manager, giddy with excitement, just blurting out a perfect phrase.
I imagine he was also saying that at the FA Cup final as well this season. The same sort of way of thinking. What do you think about this new Manchester United era and under Jim Ratcliffe? What do you think is going to emerge in the coming years?
Well, I don't think anyone could say it's not ambitious. That's, I think the one thing that we all, would agree on about the last X years is that it's been, there's been a slide, and it's just not being a centre of excellence, which is what Manchester United should aspire to be. Manchester United should be the best, or certainly should be close to the best, or aspiring to be the best. And I think the what we're seeing about, we're not just going to sort of tinker with the stadium. We might knock it down and build a new one. They're doing that to the training ground. There is just the sense that ambition has returned to United in a big way. Whether it's all going to work, how quickly it's going to work, all to be seen. But I think, if I was a fan, I would at least think that there are, the amount of change is necessary.
And I wanted to ask you about what you think of the future for sports writers. If you were a young buck now heading into the world of journalism and sport journalism, the way that young people these days consume the media, the way that we in fact consume the media these days is so very different to how it used to be, in terms of short form, long form, podcasts, all sorts of different manners of ways that you can consume the media these days. Where does that leave the sports writer in 2024?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think so I think the exciting thing is that there are more opportunities than ever, actually. In some sense, coming from a newspaper background, obviously everyone knows the challenges that newspapers have faced. Newspapers have had a difficult time. Have had to really adapt. I've left the Times now, but I think they've done would say, and believe that doing a subscription app was actually very smart thinking. I think it's, that there has been sort of successful transition to the new era. But obviously there's a whole proliferation now of, websites, of, the sort of multimedia. I mean, going back to, covering Manchester United in the 1990s, there would be 6-7 of us sat around chat to Alex Ferguson. We had his home number. We'd ring him at home regularly. The idea of doing that with Pep Guardiola is just unthinkable. So there's been this vast spread of media, which means there's plenty of opportunity out there. But of course, it means that I think if you probably have to be more adaptable. You probably have to, as we're doing here, doing something on screen. I suspect if you're a young journalist coming through now, you're not just thinking as a writer. You're probably thinking, well, maybe I need to learn how to podcast or learn what the different skills are, what's the best way of packaging what I do. And I just think that there's a broad know-how that's probably required of a young journalist through. When I was coming through it, it was almost literally broadcast, written, or magazines. That was how my journalism course was divided up. And I suspect now there's a much more blurring between those courses. If I was doing a writing course, I'd still want to understand about some video and audio and as well.
Matt, it's been a few weeks since you wrote your last piece. How are you? I mean, you probably would have written a million times about how sports people have to learn to adjust to life outside of the routine of being a sports person. I mean, what on earth is it like for you after all these years to have to transition and learn to adjust to not having to hit a deadline?
Yeah, that I'd say the deadlines I'm not missing. I would the biggest first thing is actually not being on my mobile phone about 18 hours a day. So I'm in my house. Most houses it's the parents shouting at the kid to come off their phone. And in my house, it's always been the opposite. My kids saying, get off that thing, because I think particularly in newspaper journalism, maybe across journalism, it's just you're on it. It's not just a job. It is a lifestyle. It's something that you want to be on the news. You want to be connected. That's how you get stories. I used to almost feel like I'm not doing my job unless I'm, talking to someone or finding out something. That it becomes it's a muscle memory, and so I'm weaning myself off that. But I'm very lucky. I sort of have stepped away with other thoughts. I've retrained as a psychotherapist, and back to your point and question about being interested in people as much as, I actually, when I look back and realise the type of journalism I like doing and what I liked about sport, I realised a lot of it was an understanding of people. So I think that was there, and that's a passion I've sort of taken into psychotherapy. So I've done that training, and I've got a sports book or two I hope to write. So I'll be keeping my my laptop open. So yeah, a hybrid career is the plan.
Do you think you'll end up working with some sports teams more closely?
To be honest, at this point, I've thought about it. It's a really interesting question. One, and I'm open-minded to it, and I'd like to explore it further. And I think there's actually some fascinating work that could be done. I mean, you think about managers. I mean, football managers, they're ostensibly out there in a performance world, but actually how they lead is, you could say, could be a very fascinating therapeutic exercise. I mean, they are the people they are, and the leaders they are because of their development, because of their experience, because of their background. And we're talking right back to childhood. I'm not saying all of them want to be sort of put on the couch, but I think, any leadership coach, good leadership coach, really would certainly have a therapeutic underpinning as well. So I have thought about it. Equally, there's one just small reservation I have, is that that performance culture again. Obviously, in sport, performance can feel like everything. It's about the winning. But at the same time, is there space to allow for the vulnerability, to allow, if you were brought in to be a therapist in a football team, is it just about patching up the striker so that he can play on Saturday and score a hat-trick, or is it about understanding him as a person and the deeper issues he might have? So I think there's a potential tension in there as well. So I'm very open-minded to it. I definitely want to sort of explore possibilities around it. I think there is big potential there, but it would also need an open-mindedness that, and ultimately, I mean, all of this work should underpin performance. I think if people are more settled in themselves, more self-aware, more reflective, ultimately that should underpin good performance. But I think it takes the sort of confidence of an organisation to trust that and to buy into that.
I think your reservations could be juxtaposed with your confidence of what else it could bring. I think there's something in this. I want you to remember this question and your answer, because I think you're going to get a lot of phone calls, maybe not 8,000, but a lot of phone calls off the back of that comment. Matt, thanks so much for speaking to me. It's been a complete joy.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. No, and yeah, well, I'll be circulating my psychotherapy details, widely afterwards.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers.
Join us for the Performance People podcast every week for the highs, lows, lessons and stories from people like this lot. Michael Johnson.
Some days what I would see is a person who is a shell of what I used to be.
Eddie Hearn.
We don't operate in a business that's dangerous, but we just operate in one where you've got to sleep with one eye open.
Mo Farah.
It couldn't get any harder than what I've gone through, and at that point I just kind of went for it.
Paula Radcliffe.
You can only control yourself.
Susie Wolf.
And Toto did once liken me to a donkey.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.